Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm one of the product managers here at Blackbaud. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a new integration between Blackbaud's learning management system and LockDown browser. Now, if you're not familiar with LockDown browser, it's an integration that hooks into Blackbaud's online assessment module. This ensures that students cannot access outside resources while taking high-stakes online tests and quizzes. This particular integration supports Windows, Mac OS, Chromebooks, and iPads. Before you can access LockDown browser, or rather before your students can access LockDown browser will need to be installed on the student's devices. This can be handled in one of two ways. First, as an admin, you can go into Core Settings, Integration Settings, LockDown browser, and you can access the install files from this particular screen. Likewise, when students launch the test-taking experience, they can access the install files from their devices as well. Once the LockDown browser has been installed, students will be able to take any assessment that is configured to use the LockDown browser integration functionality. Now, there are 3 steps to using LockDown browser. Again, like I mentioned earlier, it must first be installed. Now, once it's installed once, then your students are good to go. So installing it the single time will allow them to take as many assessments as they would like, utilizing the LockDown browser functionality. Secondly, teachers need to enable LockDown browser. We do not enable LockDown browser for every single assessment. It's up to the teacher to decide when to use the browser experience and when not to use the browser experience. Finally, before a student launches the assessment, they should go through and close any open programs ahead of time. This ensures that LockDown browser will open and run smoothly without running into too many hiccups. And again, we'll go through an example here in just a little bit. Now, let's go ahead and take a look in product to see what configuring the integration looks like and how this appears to both faculty and students. Okay. So once the LockDown browser has been activated, you as an admin can go into Core Settings, Integration Settings, LockDown browser to access the managed install files as well as a couple of other security-related features for the LockDown browser experience. On the right-hand side, we can see the manage install files. Simply click on the file that you would like to download, and you will be able to access those. One thing that I will note is that for the Microsoft Windows install file here, this install is specifically for managed devices. So if your school manages a suite of Windows-based laptops or other devices, this is certainly the one that you would utilize. However, if your school follows a bring your own device philosophy, then your students will be able to access that particular Windows install file from the assessment taking experience, and we'll take a look at that here in just a little bit. On the left, we have a couple of options here. We have what is called an allow list and a block list. The allow list is great for programs that you want to continue running should LockDown browser be launched. To give you an example, if you have a student that needs a screen reader, you may add that into the allow list. That way it doesn't get closed when LockDown browser runs. Now, I will note that this only works for installed programs. If the program is based in the cloud, the allow list and the block list will not work for those particular programs. So again, this is just for installed programs. Similarly, you can do the same for a block list. So if you're finding that the LockDown browser is allowing for certain devices to continue to run, adding that program name to the block list is a great way of ensuring that that particular program is terminated when the LockDown browser is launched. We'll talk through this setting in just a little bit. You'll see it in action as a student, but when LockDown browser launches, for each program that is running, the LockDown browser will ask the student to close it. And that happens on a program by program basis. So if the student has 10 programs that are currently running, they will see 10 pop-ups. If instead you want the program to simply show one singular pop-up that will eliminate and terminate all programs on the student's computer, you can toggle this allow for bulk block functionality. Finally, down at the bottom, we have what's called the Proctor exit passcode. Should the student get locked out or locked into the lockdown browser, I should say, or if you need to pause the student's assessment, for example, if the student has an emergency mid-take, you can go ahead and use the Proctor exit password on the student's device to pause their assessment. Now, this is a code that is used site-wide, so this would be for any and all assessments that the students are taking. So definitely not something that you want to give to students, but maybe a passcode that you want to give to all of your faculty. That way, as they are proctoring those exams, should the student encounter some kind of a problem, your teachers are able to utilize that passcode to terminate the lockdown browser experience. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what this appears for when a faculty member is configuring the lockdown browser. Alright, so now I'm impersonating a teacher. For the teacher experience, this is going to be very, very similar to the assessment creation experience. Not a whole heck of a lot has changed on the teacher's end. When they're ready to create an online assessment that uses Lockdown Browser, they'll create an assessment just like they always have. They'll click on the Add dropdown, click Assessment, and then from here, when the Lockdown Browser integration is enabled, they'll see some new options on their setup screen. From here, the teacher is able to click Enable Lockdown Browser, and should that be enabled, they can also enable a virtual calculator that students can use while taking online assessments. Now, you'll notice that when I have enabled Lockdown Browser, the Allow Students to Resume Independently option has been disabled. This is because in order for students to exit an online assessment that is utilizing Lockdown Browser, there are only two ways that they can get out of that experience. The first of which is to submit the assessment. So once a student has taken the assessment and has gone ahead and submitted it, we redirect them back to their original browser. The other way that the student can exit out of the lockdown experience is if a faculty member gives them the Proctor exit passcode, right? They can go ahead, look in their lockdown browser, use that passcode to then exit out of the lockdown experience. Other than that, the only way that the student is able to get out is really submitting the assessment. Now, the teacher comes in here and creates the test just like they always have. They go ahead and add in their points, plug in their result page settings, and choose which sections it's going to be published to and when. Other than that, that is all that the teacher has to do in order to get the lockdown experience functional and ready for students. Alright, I've gone ahead and impersonated a student. Now, in order for the student to access the Lockdown Browser, there's not a whole heck of a lot that they're going to have to do on their end either. When the student is ready to take the assessment, now this is again granted that the teacher has published and has marked the assessment as ready for taking, the student will be able to see the assessment on their assignment center or on the assignment tab of their class page. Now, clicking into the assessment, they're going to see a couple of new options. Now, with Lockdown Browser installed, the student will always see this section here in the introduction. This is where the student can go to access those install files. So they can click Install Lockdown Browser, and from here they can access any one of the 4 install files that they might need. Now, it is up to the student ultimately to select the correct install file. Once they have downloaded the install file, they will need to run it to ultimately install it onto their device. But again, once that is done a single time, they do not have to install this again. They just run it the one time and they are good to go. Now, once that install has run successfully, the student can then test the Lockdown Browser. Now, this is a piece of functionality that I will be able to demo for all of you, but I will not be able to demo the Begin Test option, as that will shut down several of my recording programs. Now, here, we're going to go ahead and click Test Lockdown Browser. So this is going to confirm that we want elevated rights. The answer is yes. and then LockDown Browser will load. Now, LockDown Browser is ultimately an entirely separate browser, just like Chrome, just like Firefox. Now, one thing that you'll notice here is that the LockDown Browser will let you know when you are either plugged in or running on battery power. Again, for students that are taking particularly long exams online, they want to make sure that they either have adequate battery power charge or ensure that they are plugged in. Now we'll go ahead and click OK. The LockDown browser is going to run, and here we can see the success message. So this means that the browser is successfully installed and the student will be able to begin the assessment. If the student receives a different message here, such as the LockDown browser is not installed, they would not be able to even see this particular screen load and would instead see that error message, meaning that something may have gone wrong with the install, and if the install was run, go ahead and uninstall and try reinstalling. So we're going to go ahead and click close. That's going to exit our LockDown browser experience and move us back into the original online test taking experience. Here we are. So we can see it closed, and now I'm back in my original Edge instance. Now, a few things that I want to note about the student experience. The first is, again, when they are in that test-taking experience, the only way that they can get out is by submitting the assessment or a faculty member using that Proctor passcode. Once the student has submitted the assessment, the results page will also appear in the LockDown browser. So anytime that the student wants to go back into the assessment to see things like their grade or any questions and answers that existed on the assessment while they were taking it, that will always launch in the LockDown browser. Now, if the faculty member does not want students to continuously load the LockDown browser, they can always go in and unmark the LockDown browser checkbox on the assignment details. Now, they should really only do this once the assessment is completely taken by all sections, as that will prevent the LockDown browser from launching for any of them. But if the teacher does want to release grades, for example, for all of the class sections at one time and not have the students have that load in the LockDown browser, again, they can go into those assessment settings and unmark that particular option. Now, with that, we do have some tips when it comes to utilizing the LockDown browser that we'll go over in just a moment, but that is the student experience. Now that we've seen LockDown browser in product, let's talk through a couple of tips for utilizing the service. First, ensure that any device that is having the LockDown browser installed has admin level rights. Installing LockDown browser without admin level rights can result in problems when launching the integration. Now, this is a one-time occurrence, so simply allow for admin level install the single time. Once the install has completed, you can then go back to ensuring any security level rights that are necessary can go back onto the device. If LockDown browser will not launch after an install, a good troubleshooting step is uninstalling the LockDown browser and reinstalling it. There are oftentimes instances where something may go wrong with the install, and doing a simple uninstall and reinstall will solve most issues. Always test the LockDown browser after a fresh install. So as we saw on the student's test-taking experience, before they begin an online assessment, they can actually test the installation. Ensuring that LockDown browser launches and the student receives the successful screen when they test the browser is definitely something that should be done after every fresh install. Remind students before they launch the LockDown browser with any assessment to close any open programs or extra browser tabs before clicking Begin Test. Again, this just ensures that the student gets into the test-taking experience as seamlessly as humanly possible. If a student is stuck in the LockDown browser, this can happen sometimes depending on what occurs, or if the student, for example, loses power while in the test-taking experience and is unable to exit the LockDown browser experience, a faculty member can use that Proctor passcode to terminate the LockDown browser mid-assessment. Finally, if a program is not being blocked by LockDown browser, try adding the program name to the block list in Core. This should then prevent that particular program from launching when LockDown browser is also launching. Thank you again for watching this video. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.